Welcome everyone to this Community Energy webinar, a community battery for Ballan being hosted by the Grampians Community Power Hub in partnership with the Moorabool Environment Group. My name's Mary Debrett. I'm the president of Ballarat Renewable Energy and Zero Emissions Inc., the lead partner in the Grampians Community Power Hub. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we are meeting, albeit virtually, tonight, the Wurundjeri, the Wathaurong, and the Dja Dja Wurrung peoples, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd like to invite those of you logging on tonight to acknowledge your traditional owners and to introduce yourselves via the webinar chat facility. We have 3 speakers online tonight who will each present for approximately 5 to 7 minutes before we open the discussion up to the public. And we invite you to write your questions in the Zoom Q&A facility as they arise for you, for responses from the panelists later after all the presentations. Our presenters tonight are Taryn Lane, manager of Hepburn Energy, formerly Hepburn Wind, who represents our Hepburn Shire branch partner on the Grampians Community Power Hub. Taryn is a member of the project control group and also one of our leading experts on community energy. Sowmya Nagaraj is the project manager of the Grampians Community Power Hub. Sowmya is an engineer with a master's in sustainable energy. And Cruz, a Ballan resident, a committee member of the Moorabool Environment Group and a contact person for the Ballan battery project. Before we get into the presentations, I'll just say a little bit about BREAZE and the work we do, and also explain what the Grampians Community Power Hub is and how we work. Sowmya will speak in more detail on the way the hub works later. BREAZE has been working in this space, community energy, since 2007, beginning with solar bulk buys in the days when commercial installers were few and far between, and more recently through our social solar program, which raises funds to enable social housing and other not-for-profits to access renewable energy resources. From 2017 to 2020, BREAZE led the Ballarat Community Power Hub pilot program, which eventually contributed approximately 1 megawatt of renewables across the region. As a result of the 9 of the 11 projects being identified, being funded for implementation through the Victorian Government's Grampians Renewable Energy Program, which ran from 2020 to 2021, was one of the Victorian Government's COVID recovery initiatives. The current 2021 to 2022 Community Power Hub program, which is being delivered by Sustainability Victoria on behalf of the Victorian Government, is a statewide initiative with 7 hubs, all led by not-for-profit community groups like BREAZE. Our role in the Grampians Community Power Hub is to identify renewable energy projects in the not-for-profit sector across the 11 local government areas of the Grampians region. Moorabool is one of those 11 LGAs, which is why we're hosting this webinar tonight. Through Sustainability Victoria, we have funds to undertake feasibility studies for relevant and viable projects we identify across the region. We don't have funding for the implementation of those projects, although we can help communities to find a funding pathway for implementation. And as some of you will likely know, a professional feasibility study is frequently a prerequisite for applying for government funding for implementation. Part of our role in the Grampians Community Power Hub is also to raise public awareness of the benefits of renewable energy cost savings, local jobs, and of course, reduced emissions. Building social license for renewable energy is important for facilitating the clean energy transition across the state and for achieving Victoria's emissions reduction target, 45 to 50% reductions on 2005 levels by 2030. Greening the grid is the single most important thing we can do in fighting climate change. Much of what the staff and volunteers at the Grampians Community Power Hub do is community engagement, talking to people like yourselves about how we can help to facilitate renewable energy projects in your community. Tonight we're talking about a community battery in Ballan, but elsewhere we've talked about rooftop solar, solar farms, behind the meter batteries, off-grid solar and battery installations, and microgrids. We've been talking to not-for-profits like men's sheds, community centres, sporting clubs, community-owned kindergartens, social housing providers, and more. any group that's operated by a community committee of management, which of course includes environmental groups like the Moorabool Environment Group, who have brought us all here tonight. So if you're from another local government area in the Grampians and have a project in mind, please get in touch with us. We'll post our contact details at the end of the webinar. But for now, on to the more important topic of community batteries and the prospects and process whereby this might become a reality for Ballan. So I'll hand over to Taryn Lane, who is our expert on this and on many other topics, who's going to explain the present day possibilities for community batteries, to be followed soon after by Sowmya Nagaraj, the Hub's project manager, who will outline the key parts of the process for Ballan. Over to you, Taryn.
Great, thanks so much, Mary. And I'll just get Paul to bring up the presentation. I'll just get you to go into slideshow mode. Great, and thanks everyone for showing up today, and hi to you from just next door in the Hepburn Shire. Community batteries are something that's really emergent at the moment. So that's very kind of Mary to say that I'm an expert, but I think I'm an expert in things around, the community-owned wind farm over in Leonards Hill, but certainly community batteries are something that's very emergent globally at the moment. And how and what it might look like in the Australian context is still really being developed, and there's many regulatory barriers in the way currently, but there's also some really, really exciting pilots happening. And it's something that is very strategic to get ready for. And I'll sort of run through why that is, and also a local project that's currently underway at the moment that the Moorabool Environment Group has the ability to, choose to partner with, so that we can see more outcomes come out of that project across the region. So community batteries are essentially, instead of every household having their own battery, it's a collective of households and businesses or community buildings having a shared battery resource, and that battery could be deployed on a council facility, but also service the street, or it could be deployed on a power pole and service, all of the houses in that street. So really they can be any kind of size, from down to 100 kilowatts. So a typical household battery is 13.5 kilowatts. So they could be anywhere from 100 kilowatts up to 5 megawatts, and be able to service hundreds of houses and businesses. There's many different models that are currently being deployed across Australia. So when we say community batteries, we don't necessarily mean community owned. There could be various models deployed. Retailers could own them, the local network distributor could own them, or you could have a local community cooperative own them. So there's many different models that can be deployed. Community batteries are increasingly seen as a solution to deal with the huge uptake of rooftop solar, that we're seeing across Victoria and across Australia, and the fact that more and more households and local businesses to deploy solar if they don't have the grid is starting to get to penetration of about 30 to 40% of what it can handle in regards to voltage rise with local rooftop installations. So in order to unlock more and to make sure that our neighbours can also have solar if we've had solar in the future, we're going to need solutions like household batteries and also community batteries in order to further unlock rooftop solar. And again, that's also really important to, as Mary was saying, green the grid, but also to reach 100% renewable locally across our communities. So I did mention, there are significant barriers in place currently, but importantly, there is some really exciting pilots happening. There's also economic hurdles. So, batteries are still quite expensive. The cost curve is changing every year. They're coming down in price. And we're starting to see more and more grants out there and sort of forecast it to happen around community batteries. So it is an important opportunity to get ready for, both to deal with the huge uptake of rooftop solar, but also to take these opportunities in the future. So some of the sites that are really of interest, mainly from a network perspective, but also from a community perspective, is firstly, dealing with voltage rise, so too much rooftop solar PV on the local grid. Secondly, dealing with poor grid reliability. Thirdly, with network constraints, so this is to unlock more transfer of energy across network constraints. And fourthly is other community value. So this might be a site that is a hub when there's a local fire or a local storm, and it's really important to keep power on during those times. So there's a whole bunch of non-network related issues that are also really, really of importance to I know communities all around our area. And another key thing just to know is whilst lots of communities and our community can be very positive and really desire a community battery, the network operator, so in our case Powercore, is really going to be the important partner to determine where those sites of best use are. So yeah, it is a little bit of a give and take around where those locations might be. Next slide, please. So currently there is a project underway across the region, and this is one of the projects that is under the Grampians Community Power Hub, and it's led by the Central Victorian Greenhouse Alliance, and Hepburn Wind and Hepburn Shire Council are the primary partners in that project. But we also have 6 other local governments, so 6 other councils that are partnering in this project as well. And Moorabool is not yet one of those projects, but one of those areas, but it could be. There is still the time and the ability to add Moorabool into the mix if there's that local interest happening. So the current project is funded under the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative, which is a state government funded initiative, which is supporting the communities and different councils and different proponents to assess local community battery opportunities and what those models might look like within their local context. So Hepburn Wind, we're undertaking social feasibility and working with the consultants and with CVGA to look at a range of technical, commercial, regulatory and social barriers. So we will receive an analysis of 5 sites within the Hepburn Shire, and the 6 partner councils will also have 1 site each undertaken within this project as well. And as well as looking at different models, it will also look at, how can communities or how can councils or local proponents choose battery locations and choose models that might be appropriate for them. So we're trying to come up with some resources that are able to be used more broadly as well. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of an example of some of the types of batteries that are underway at the moment. So in New South Wales, there's a pilot underway by Innova, which is a community retailer operating out of Byron Bay. And they have a shared community battery scheme of about 2 megawatts. So it's servicing, hundreds of homes. And essentially they were seeing just, very high rooftop solar penetration. So they wanted to enable peer-to-peer trading. So it's a partnership with their local grid, a technical platform, the customers and the retailer and a local university. Then in Victoria, Yarra Energy Foundation is partnering with City Power, which is it's under the same ownership structure as Powercore, our local network. And essentially they're looking for a community ownership model where they'll be deploying community batteries for solar and non-solar owners within the broader Greater Melbourne region. And then over in Western Australia, there is another battery trial happening with Synergy, and this is a battery subscription model, and this is for solar owners. So they pay a flat fee, it's $11, and then they essentially have a time of use tariff, which encourages them, when to use energy and when to export it. So they're the kind of models that we're starting to see, implemented, not just studied, but these are being deployed right now across the country. Thanks. I'll just hand over to Sowmya now.
Thank you, Taryn, and good evening, everyone. Looking at the Community Sparks project, Taryn just spoke about we will need to consider what will work for the Ballan community, as every community group has different requirements and parameters that need to be taken into consideration. The study will mainly focus on, specifically for Ballan, will focus on technical and financial modeling, for instance, identifying where the battery can be located, size of the system and how it interacts with the local network, as well as demand management and participation in the frequency and ancillary markets. The other points that we will need to consider are firstly the site location. As Taryn mentioned before, this can be explored more broadly, but the network plays an important role in helping us understand suitable locations. In this case, it is PowerCo. Secondly, partnering up with councils will benefit, with our local council will be quite beneficial, as they will have access to potential sites. And thirdly, funding to undertake these studies, which is approximately $5,000, especially if Ballan can collaborate with the Community Sparks project and adopt similar models. And lastly, since the Community Power Hub is meant to be finishing up by the end of June this year, we must progress quickly so we can complete feasibility assessments before the closing of the project. Next slide, please. The Moorabool Environment Group and the local community in Ballan can use some of the resources developed by the Community Sparks project to build their own neighborhood battery. For example, understanding commercial arrangements between the stakeholders involved, business cases that can be used as a reference point for potential projects, and also understanding social barriers, benefits, and also various community ownership models available. Additionally, there will be abundant educational toolkits also available to scope projects that can be shared to make further decisions. Next slide, please. Once a project idea has been clearly established, there is significant interest in further developing the project within the community. The Community Power Hub will be able to present the project to the Roundtable Advisory Group to seek approval for funding the feasibility studies. The Roundtable Advisory Group has members from the 11 LGAs in the Grampians region and was established last year in August to assist in project consultations and a fair governance approach in decision making. After the completion of the feasibility analysis, the project is ready to be implemented subject to obtaining funding. The Community Power Hub is able to support community groups in seeking grant and further funding opportunities after technical, financial, and social feasibility assessments have been completed. That is all from me now. Thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks, Taryn and Sowmya. Lots of things to think about there, particularly for Ballan residents interested in participating in this community battery project. I suspect much of what's been said will inform the community conversations over the coming weeks. For those logged on tonight, please, if you have any questions for Taryn or Sowmya, write them now in the Q&A facility, and we'll address them at the end of the presentations. Obviously, Ballan residents will need to have more conversations before the feasibility phase begins, which leads me to our final presenter for tonight, Rose de la Cruz, a committee member of the Moorabool Environment Group and the driving force behind this project. And Rose is going to talk about what the next steps are for those of you who are Ballan residents and are interested in seeing a community battery in Ballan. Over to you, Rose.
Well, thank you very much, Mary, and good evening. It's lovely to have so many people online, and thank you all for joining this session on the possibility of a community battery for Ballan. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Wathaurong, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm a member of the Moorabool Environment Group, and the group was established over 14 years ago by a small group of volunteers And we were all interested in protecting the land, air and water of this area and looking at the bigger picture, of course, protecting the planet. We're all interested in working towards a more environmentally sustainable future. And the group has grown over the years and has been actively involved in many environmental issues and projects. We now have a membership of about 45 people from within the Shire, and we have monthly meetings, a newsletter, Facebook page, and a website, and of course we have a few social events when COVID permits. Our mission statement is based on the concept of think global, act local. And our aims include education, two-way education. We need to learn a lot ourselves, as we are tonight, and of course pass on information to other people in the community. We're interested in awareness raising of environmental problems and their solutions. And we have sort of a grassroots, hands-on type approach to things. We've been involved in many projects and campaigns. Just a couple of examples. We're very interested in the protection of the waterways, especially in our area, the Werribee River and its ecosystem. We do a lot of revegetation, often in partnership with other groups like Land Care and Progress. The promotion of solar rooftop. We've set up neighbourhood solar rooftops in the past. And we have been part of the, let me say, successful fights to avoid more new coal mines being built in our area and the storage of toxic soil. We're also interested, of course, in good waste management. And these are the sort of things that MEG, the Moorabool Environment Group, is involved in. But of course, we're always interested in new projects which are helping to move towards a more environmentally sustainable future. So let's go on to the possibility of a battery for Ballan. It's very exciting to start the new year with a new project. And although this one's in an early stage, it's just wonderful to think that Ballan could possibly be part of the statewide pilot project to set up community batteries to store solar electricity. So thank you very much to the speakers tonight. You've been very informative. I've learned a lot, and I think everybody on the webinar has learned a lot already. Ballan, as far as the town for a community battery goes, we have a lot of public, well, not a lot, we have many public buildings that already have solar panels, and we have a lot of residential houses with solar rooftops. And we'd love to work with BREAZE to develop a feasibility study to set up a community battery to store the excess electricity that we're producing on our rooftops here. We'll also be encouraging residents who do not yet have solar panels to consider getting involved and joining us. We're very fortunate in Ballan in that we've already got one very successful business that has their own battery and that produce all their own electricity for their business. So clearly we have precedent. We've got enough sun in Ballan to warrant a community battery. This battery would not only benefit the locals who are involved, but it would be a great educational tool for the two primary schools in Ballan, and also maybe a model that could be used for other towns in the Shire. We'll be following up this initial meeting at our next MEG meeting in February, and we invite you all to join us at that meeting. Our meetings are the last Thursday of every month, and of course they're online at the moment because of COVID, but they might get back to face-to-face meetings in future. But please see our website, our website or our Facebook page better for more details, or you can always call me on my phone. MEG has several working groups within the organisation, one of which is renewable energy. This subgroup will be reporting on the progress of the community battery at each monthly meeting. We also encourage you to complete the online survey that is up there, because at this stage, what we want is a lot of input from the community. We We want all your ideas and brainwaves and questions and suggestions. The conversation has started, and we, the Renewable Energy Working Group within MEG, are looking forward very much to working with BREAZE on the next stage of this project, the feasibility study. So let's start with the Q&A, questions to the very knowledgeable people on the panel. I have lots of questions, but I could start with one.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say thank you, and again to the viewers. Before we start the questions, if anybody else has got any questions for Rose or for Taryn or for Sowmya, could you please drop them in the Q&A facility now? And I just want to say, yeah, that sadly, because of COVID, of course, a lot of this conversation is going to continue to be on online platforms like tonight. We're always going to have hiccups with funny sound and images, so I hope you'll bear with us. Please don't give up and continue these conversations. It's very important. And later this week we will be forwarding everyone who attended the seminar a link to the video recording and to the online survey, which is primarily for Ballan and Moorabool residents. So please, if you do live in Ballan, complete the survey. The more who complete it, the better. It only takes about 2 minutes. And please tell your neighbours about it. The data gathered is going to help those who are heading up the project, like Rose and Taryn and Sowmya. So yeah, so sorry, Rose, you had some questions, please.
Well, would you like me to start, or would you like questions?
Yeah, no, fire away.
Well, I think it was touched on, but I'd like to know who will manage the battery. Is it PowerCore that manages, and how much influence will community members actually have on the use and management of a battery?
I'm happy to answer that one. I'll just start answering it. So look, it really depends on what the model is that's deployed locally. So yes, there are versions where PowerCore is deploying, batteries on their poles to service, say, a street of 70 households, and they're responsible for ownership, they're responsible for asset management, they're responsible for the tariffs around that and control of that asset. But then there's models such, oh, sorry, Rose, can you just put me on, can you go on mute? I'm getting a background noise from you, I think. Thanks. And then there's models such as the Yarra model, which we mentioned, which is community owned, and they're looking at both cooperative structures or and also sort of public company structures, where they'll essentially be a subscription model. So a collective of people per household, per street or per area, that will all have collective ownership and usage of that battery, but then the asset management will be taken care of by, say, a service provider that the Yarra Energy Foundation would have an arrangement with. So that's kind of two models on a spectrum. And then there's other variations that could be deployed as well, because it's such a new space. And as I mentioned, retailers are also very keen to get active in that space as well. So, for some communities, they may want to have control over an asset like that, and would really be seeking out models that would facilitate that. But for other communities, they might just want the battery, and they just want to know that it's going to be taken care of and managed appropriately. So it really is up to the community to participate in those discussions and to work through what an appropriate model might look like.
Okay, Rose, I'll come back to you. I'll just take one of the questions from the Q&A. Tor Roxburgh has said, I'm a member of the Ballan Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber has prioritised the green economy. We have been trying to get EV charging stations for the past year, but momentum has slowed. I think the Chamber would be very interested in this proposal. So that's something you might want to follow up with, Tor. And we have a question from Keith Ward. Why are PowerCore not providing these facilities, power hubs, batteries, etc.? Taryn?
Yeah, well, it's not standard business for PowerCore. Wouldn't it be fantastic if they were co-funding the Community Power Hub program and co-funding community batteries out there. But look, their bread and butter is really taking care of the electricity grid, and there is, a huge amount of change happening on the local electricity grid as we move towards more of a smart grid. So that's really their business. But certainly with batteries, they are partnering, for example, with the Yarra an energy battery that is a city power project, which is under the same collective ownership as Powercore. So they are definitely in there and being supportive and helping communities deploy a range of models.
And a question for you, Sowmya. Keith Ward asks, where does the power go that's stored in the community battery? What price is paid for that power?
So I guess this is a question that will be answered a little bit later in stage. It's a little bit too early to be talking about the prices that I guess that, or the kind of, even depending on the ownership model, or like where, like if it's community owned or DNSP owned, and all of these factors come into picture before we can, I guess, consider what prices it would cost for you to export and import as well. So I guess it's something that would be better established once we have a feasibility study in place, which can give us a better understanding of the costs as such. And even with energy trading and all these other aspects of it, more the revenue-based aspects of the battery.
Thank you. Rose, do you have another question?
Yes. Could we use this stored electricity when there's a blackout or a bushfire? Because a lot of us work at home, and we've had a lot of electrical storms recently, for example, and everything collapses, the computers all go blank, and people can't. Anyway, is it possible for the local people to sort of say, we're having a blackout, let's all jump in on the stored electricity? Is that one of the benefits that definitely available?
So not necessarily definitely available. It can be something that you sort of are aspiring to get some kind of outcome around. Where it gets really complicated is the ability of the grid to island. So, the ability for the grid to kind of operate by itself and not be connected to the balance of the grid. Now, there are certain areas which can be islandable into the future. So particularly end of the line areas are very good for that. But where you might see that blend of how to support people locally with electricity during major events is through ensuring that there's a big enough battery that is partially behind the meter, so partially on a building site and partially serves front of the meter, so a few streets or a local town. And during a bushfire or storm, that building is able to have sufficient power for people to be able to come in and cook or shower or be in the air conditioning or charge their phones, so that community facility stays on for longer than say a couple of hours, but it could go for a few days and really be there as a community service. So that is easily deployable currently under the current kind of regulatory context.
Okay.
Can I just ask, sorry to be a bit silly, but could you just explain a little bit more about behind the meter and in front of the meter?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, everyone, to get a little bit jargony there. So behind the meter basically is what happens, before electricity gets exported into the grid. So if you've got rooftop solar at home, all of the energy during the middle of the day when you're using it to, wash your clothes or wash your dishes, that's all happening behind the meter. And then when you export your excess energy and you receive a payment for that, that's called front of the meter.
Okay, a question from Kay. Will the Ballan Community Battery be available for use by residents living in Mount Egerton and surrounds, e.g. farms 5 kilometres out from Mount Egerton? Post office now closed.
So again, that really depends where the project is sited. I'm not familiar enough with the local grid, but essentially, you know, you're mainly looking for either a zone substation or you're looking for a kiosk on the local grid that is a bit of a centre point of either multiple streets coming together or, you know, just behind a town, and they're really ideal locations for a battery. And you know, closer together, less spread out houses is generally beneficial as well, which is why we're starting to see a lot of them deployed in Melbourne City and Greater Melbourne.
And another question from Tor Roxburgh. If you opt for a community-owned model, would it produce a financial dividend for the community?
So again, I think that's dependent on what's the outcome that you're seeking and what's the model that you're seeking. It may be that it provides you know, discounts on electricity bill, or it provides, you know, you're sort of reusing the solar power that was an excess during the day. You're then able to access that at night and use it. So you're able to you know, have higher consumption of your own power, you know, or export it and receive a payment and then comes off your electricity bill. So it could work like that, or it could be, you know, you could also have a bunch of investors that are investing in it and they get paid, you know, a dividend out of it, but they're not subscribers. So there's many different models that you could deploy depending on you know, what's interesting and fit for purpose.
And a question for Sowmya. Would a battery be able to store our rooftop solar exports during a power outage? From J Love.
I think if it would be islandable, if the model is in such a way that it is able to island, then I think it would definitely be able to store the export from the rooftop into the battery.
And Keith Ward asks, what are the benefits to households? Anyone?
So some of the benefits, as I mentioned before, are you know, being able to utilise your excess solar energy at different times of the day, and as a collective to be able to do that, and to facilitate more households to have rooftop PV, because we are starting to get very close to the local grid threshold of between 30 and 40%. So, you know, it hasn't been too obvious yet, but, you know, I've certainly been starting to see in communities such as Clunes, in Hepburn Springs, that, you know, certain neighbours have all had solar, and now, you know, other neighbours are applying to get solar, and they're being told by the network operator that they won't be able to export their solar. So therefore the feasibility of them to have rooftop solar is now no longer there unless they deploy a battery at their household level, or, you know, they participate in a community battery. So it's really about equity for more than 30 to 40% of households, and really unlocking that equity across you know, a bigger part of the population. It's also about tenants, so renters being able to participate in projects like this as well.
And somebody has asked, Taryn, is it possible that entrepreneurs will move in, install batteries and get subscribers for profit?
I mean, I think anything is possible at such an emergent kind of space. And as I said, I think that probably the big movers that we'll start to see are the retailers. We're already starting to see, you know, all of the retailers start to develop what are called VPPs, or virtual power plants. So, you know, Origin's very active in that space. I know AGL has a project. So yeah, there's already a lot of movement in there. And I think, you know, the more participation we have on a local level, the more we get to decide what transition we want to see in our local area and what kind of partners we want to have in that transition. So it's really important to be active and to, you know, start being strategic about some of these opportunities that are coming up, because otherwise someone else, or, you know, a company or something similar will definitely fill that space. That space will be filled over time.
Rose, did you have another question?
Yes, I've got a long list of questions, but how does it actually work? This is probably an engineering question. I mean, I understand that it could be on the poles, but are there cables from our rooftop solar to the battery? And if so, are these underground cables, or how does the electricity actually get into this battery? Backwards and forwards, and we want to use it at night, for example. Who's digging all these trenches for the cables?
So it would just be running on the existing, low voltage network that's connecting houses to electricity, all through our area. So it would connect into the existing networks that's there. And I do know that any new cables that are developed or deployed by Powercor in our region, because of the bushfire regulations, they're all underground now. So any new ones are done underground for low voltage and distribution level. But yeah, essentially it would, be the same as connecting solar. You're not then deploying a whole bunch of new cables. You're just deploying the solar and connecting to the existing infrastructure. So it's very much the same thing with the battery.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I have a question just regarding feed-in tariff. If you feed in more solar than you draw out, later at night, more power, I should say, than you draw out, do you get sort of remuneration for that difference with the community battery?
Again, I think that would really depend on the models that were deployed and if there's sort of sharing occurring and how those payments work. Like it might be that you're sort of offsetting, other households that have got smaller, smaller systems. But yeah, you essentially want to use as much of your own solar as you can behind the meter and during the day when you can. But whatever's excess, and a lot of people do have excess, and that could be put into the battery and utilised at night or shared with other local residents.
So one of the things the pilot will be looking at in trying to work out what people want is how that financial recompense is managed. And we have another question from Keith Ward. He says, surely households' biggest benefit is their use during the day of their own solar. Feed-in tariffs at 6 cents and reducing not the aim benefit to households. Sorry, something missing there. I think that's more of a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that. Like we really want to see as much self-consumption as possible occurring, but with excess, we can also utilise that at night.
If anybody would like to ask a question in person, raise your hand, raise the hand, click on the raise hand button, I should say, on the bottom of the screen. But in the meantime, Rose, over to you. You've got any more questions?
Yes. Well, some of my questions are about financial benefits, which has been explained, will take ages to work out, I think. But if it were to be quite a reasonably sized battery, like I've seen on other projects, what does it actually look like? Does it need a large concrete pad? And, which is not environmentally friendly. And what happens to the battery at the end of its life? I mean, I know that's a bit sad to think of the end of its life in 25 years, but are we thinking long term here? And the environmental footprint of building a battery, a lithium battery, is it lithium? What is it? I'll mute myself.
Great questions, Rose. So to give you guys a bit of an idea, so 100 kilowatt battery is something that could quite easily sit on a pole. So if you sort of imagine it to be, it's probably like a 1.5 by 2 meter style size structure, and then up to the largest size, which is 5 megawatts. That's about the size of a shipping container, a single shipping container. And for something at that scale, or even half that scale, which might be one of the half-sized shipping containers, then yeah, you would need a concrete pad, and also a lot of sort of earthing, copper on the ground as well, to just make sure that it's electrically safe. And generally the life cycle of a battery is paid off within 6 months to 12 months in regards to its footprint. So it operates quite the same as a solar farm or a wind farm. And there are, you know, obviously different brands that use different types of batteries, and they are more or less, you know, environmentally robust. And that's certainly something that, you know, if you're going to deploy a community battery as a community group, you can ensure that you have that in the tender, you know, some sort of like value assessment against the type of battery you want to deploy. But, you know, certainly batteries such as Tesla are now recycling 99.7% of their existing batteries. So there is really high recyclability already happening in the sector. And then there's some really interesting brands, like one called Re-Electrify, which is taking recycled Nissan Leaf batteries out of cars, and they're redeploying them as community batteries. And so they've got less kind of power cycle, but they are totally appropriate to have another life as a community battery, and to you know, act in that role, even though they might not be fit for purpose as a single battery in a car. So there's some interesting innovations happening. And yeah, I think all of those things are really important to think through as well.
That's very exciting.
Thanks, Rose.
Wonderful.
Let's move over to Alice, who's had her hand up for quite a while. Alice.
Hi. I was fiddling with my controls, but I was happily listening. Sorry.
You don't have a question?
No, well, I'm just leaving all this to Rose. She's doing a wonderful job. No, it's very interesting. Yeah, thank you just for the attending.
Thank you. And there's an observation from Doug Palmer from energydemocracy.net in the chat, if anyone's interested in his group. He says, hi all, more an observation than question. For your information, this group has a battery and solar PV site planned for Horsham for 2023. So anybody who lives around Horsham might be interested in getting in touch with Doug. So we've talked about ownership models quite a bit, haven't we? Can you talk maybe, Sowmya, about any of the regulatory hurdles for batteries that this neighbourhood battery initiative is intended to partly address and work through? Why are we having regulatory hurdles?
I guess it's again dependent on the ownership with the DMSPs, and as well like the third-party ownership with retailers or community-owned or private investors. I guess that's pretty much where I guess most of the regulatory batteries come into picture, as well as demand management. Taryn, I guess you probably know more than me on this section, so maybe you would like to add some points?
Just in regards to tariffs, so the major barrier at the moment is also around how to avoid what's called double tariffs. So basically, every time you import electricity, you know, your electricity bill is made up of like wholesale energy. So the actual electricity, it's made up of the distribution charges, which is the network charges, and then there's a retail margin on top, which the retailer gets. Now, basically, per kilowatt hour, you pay a fee for the network to facilitate electricity going into your house. So what you don't want to do is, you know, push the excess solar out and then pay again for it to come back, because really it's your energy that's going out in the first place. So there is a bunch of projects that are being deployed where either that per kilowatt hour charge to re-import, you know, your solar from the day back into your house at night is either being waived or it's discount. And certainly there is a couple of projects that are working on what's called LUOS, which is local use of system charges, which would basically mean that yeah, a subsidy is applied because you're both generating and consuming in a hyper localized context. So that's sort of one big issue that a whole bunch of projects are looking at, and the state government's looking at quite closely.
Thank you. And in terms of safety, how safe are community batteries?
This again is sort of a big issue, particularly when you're thinking about, wanting a battery there to make your community more bushfire safe, and so that you would have a facility open whilst you've got a bushfire occurring. So there are, again, just a huge range of batteries that are available, and one in particular that is very bushfire safe is called Redflow, which is not a lithium-ion battery. It's using a different technology. So we're really starting to see a lot of variety in what's available in Australia, and a lot of things are being made here in Australia as well. So yeah, certainly things like that are all manageable depending on what the specific outcome is that each battery site needs to address.
Rose, do you have any more questions?
I think I've exhausted my list, or they've been overlapped by other people. I was really interested in the examples. Can we have some way of following up to look at these other examples that were mentioned? Are we going to get a copy of this webinar available, aren't we? So we can follow that up.
We'll be sending out a link to the recording, which will be on the BREAZE YouTube channel later this week, to everybody who's registered. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. I'd just like to say thanks so much to our experts and to you, Mary, as well, for doing such a good job with the master.
So thanks, Rose. Yeah, well, it's all due to you. Are we still on? Yeah, we seem to have shifted. I just wanted to ask another question. What's going to be required of the people of Ballan in this next phase, the feasibility, the investigation prior to the feasibility study? Is anyone able to elaborate on that? I know we're kind of working through all of this. We've got the online survey. We'll be gathering quite a bit of data from that, and we'll have the list of people who logged on for this webinar. But what else will be involved?
So I think just look, local interest is really, really important, because what you don't want is that a report is made and then nothing happens with it. That's sort of not a great outcome. So I guess local interest is very important. Having the local council on board as well. So having a chat with your Chamber of Commerce. I know there were two representatives online from there, but having a chat with them, having a chat with your local sustainability officer, because really they're the connections that are likely to have good sites that could be of use. And should there be, local interest, then, supporting Rose to work with BREAZE to get a proposal up at, a soon to come roundtable meeting, so that we can get the budget approved and join this project in with the broader regional project, if that's what everyone would feel comfortable with.
And is there a kind of an optimum number of people, punters, you need to have on board for a project to get the tick from CVGA?
No, it's really just it's all about in the end it will all come down to the sites and what the sites can facilitate, and a lot of that will be up to Powercore. So I think Rose has done a great job of already discussing with the community and getting this webinar up with BREAZE. So I think there doesn't need to be a set amount of people, just as long as there's a valid community interest.
Okay, does anyone have, Rose, if you've got any more questions, or are we ready for our...
Oh, well, just that question of valid, what does valid mean? I mean, we might have 10 extremely excited people like me and nobody else. We don't know. I mean, I think the survey is terribly important, because if everybody fills in that survey, we'll be able to actually gauge the community interest. And if there's not sufficient interest, well, of course, we can't do it. But please fill in the survey. Please get in touch with the Moorabool Environment Group and with Mary and with anybody that you want, and talk to your neighbours, as Mary was saying, talk to everybody you have coffee with and see if you can get some more buzz happening around the possible Ballan battery. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Sounds good. So hopefully we've got some enthusiastic people online who will follow up on all of that advice, Rose. And thank you very much for everybody. I guess we could put up the final slide now, unless anyone's got anything else to say. Paul, can you put up our contact slide? Thank you. We don't seem to be in full slide mode. Oh, we are. Thank you everyone for logging on. We'll be sending you that email with the video recording later in the week, and also with a link to the online survey, which you can see on that slide now under Rose's name. Jot down Rose's mobile. She's volunteered that, so you can call her or call Sowmya or myself. And we've put Taryn's email there too if you want to contact Taryn. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Thanks, Paul.